today I'm going to show you how to set up your wheel for throwing. So first thing I want to do is I want to get my splash pans on that look like this. So I'm going to take my big splash pan, see this little circle that's cut out? There is a metal rim underneath this wheel head right here. And what you're going to do is you're going to take this pan, big one, and you're going to tilt it down, and you're going to tilt it underneath. And it should be kind of difficult to get in there. You know you're doing it right. And you got to pull it on to your wheel like that. Next I'm going to get my smaller pan that looks like this. And it should slide on pretty easily. And there are little notches for you to connect them. So after I've gotten that part of my wheel ready, I'm going to sit down at the wheel. I like to use a towel over my lap because it gets so messy. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bat, B-A-T, on my wheel. So there are little screws right here to connect these. And you want to use the rough side facing up. This slick side is supposed to be facing down. I'm just going to slide that on. All right, next thing I want to do is make sure my wheel is on. So if you are right-handed, you want your wheel to be spinning counterclockwise. If you're left-handed, you're going to hit these little arrows over here, and it should go the other way. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to keep going counterclockwise. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start just throwing a cylinder. So I have a couple things. I have a couple pieces of clay already wedged about a baseball size, about a pound of clay, and I just have them ready and to the side. So I want a couple because you're probably not going to, you're going to need them so you can throw a little bit faster without having to take a break in between to get new clay. Other things I'm going to need is I'm going to need a bucket of water like this with a small sponge. I'm going to need my needle tool, this wooden pointy tool, a metal rib, and sometimes a blue rib is nice and handy, and then also a wire tool later on to cut it off the bat. So first thing I'm going to do is I do not want this bat to be wet. I want it to be dry because the clay already has moisture in it, and if you put water down, it's not going to stick. So I'm not putting any water down. I'm just going to take my clay and I'm going to slam it down into the middle as close as I can get. Now, the important thing about throwing is that you always want to make sure your arms are braced on your knees, on your legs, and you always want to make sure that your clay is slick. If you ever have dry clay, it's going to resist and pull off the wheel or mess up your pot. So I always want to make sure I have my sponge close by with water. So the first thing I'm going to do is called centering. So centering, since I'm a right-handed person, I'm going to use my left hand. I'm going to use this part of my palm, and I'm going to place it down on the bat like this. Now, centering is all about equalizing the pressure. So I'm going to press down with my right hand on top, and I'm going to press in from my left hand. And it's all about finding the equilibrium, finding the right amount of pressure between the two. So I'm going to press in, always bracing. I lean a little bit on my left, it helps me balance. So I am balancing on my legs, my arms are balancing on my legs, and then I'm starting to press in. You can see it start to take shape. And then I'm going to equal out that pressure by pressing from the top at the same time. So I have to pay really close attention to what's happening here. So I have to notice, okay, is my pot, is it getting, really wobbly at the bottom like that? Well, I can fix that. I just need to get my hands wet again, and I need to press a little bit more from the bottom. And I'm equalizing my pressure between the two. Now, another popular technique, if you are really struggling with centering your clay, what you can do is you can make sure your hands are nice and wet, and you can rest on your legs, and you're just going to gently squeeze up the clay. Keep getting your hands wet. This is called coning, and so I'm going to start from the base and kind of squeeze my clay into a cone. And then once I have that cone, I'm going to press back down and equalize that pressure again. All right, so you can see my clay is nice and even. There's no wobbling to my clay. It's a nice rounded shape. It's not spread out across the bat. And so now I can move on to the next step. So I'm going to making sure my hands are still wet. I'm going to start opening up the middle. So what that means is I'm going to take my right hand and rest it on top of my left hand, always bracing on my knees like this. And I'm going to start going down at an angle, so I'm looking for an angle going down into the middle to help me find the center. Now, what I don't want to do is I don't just want to take my finger and jab it into the middle, because that's going to make your pot off center. So centering takes a little bit of time, but it's going to help make sure your pot is even along the way. So notice I keep making sure my fingers are slick, because I don't want my clay to pull or drag and lose its centerness. All right, so now I've kind of found the middle, so I'm going to start going a little bit more directly down. And next thing I want to check for is I want to check for how far is it from my clay to the bat right here. So I'm going to take my needle tool, I'm going to put my finger on my needle tool like this, and I'm going to put my needle tool into my clay all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to slide my finger down my needle tool to where it touches the clay and hold it there and pull it out. So notice that I have, about 1/4 of an inch or so of clay before the bottom. That's perfect. That's exactly what you want. Now you don't want it to be too thin or too thick. If it's too thin, it will break. If it's too thick, it will give you a lot more work later. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up just a little bit to help me with my pulling. Now I just want to open up the middle to about 2 inches or so, nothing too wide, because otherwise you're going to end up with a bowl and not a cylinder. So I'm going to rest my right hand in my left, and I'm still bracing on my knees, and I'm going to take my finger, and what I'm doing is I'm almost creating like a little hook like this. And I'm pulling the clay out towards me nice and evenly, making sure my pressure is even. All right, so that's as wide as I want my clay to be. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the bottom. So I'm pressing down on the clay, or you can take your sponge. All I'm doing is just flattening out the bottom and putting a little bit of pressure on it to help prevent cracking. So I'm just doing that till my inside of my pot is nice and pretty. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing something called pulling. So I'm going to be pulling up the walls and making it tall. Now, you know how I said the bottom of the pot was supposed to be about 1/4 of an inch? Well, you want your walls to also be 1/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is, still making sure my hands are slick and my hands are balanced on my knees, I'm going to take a couple fingers from my left hand, and they're going to go inside my pot, and I have my sponge with my fingers behind it on the outside. Now what's going to happen is I'm putting pressure on the walls of the pot as it spins, and I'm going to slowly move my way up. So I'm putting the same amount of pressure inside and out, and if your pressure is correct, your wall should start moving straight up. Now if you put too much pressure from the inside, your walls are going to spread out like this. Or if you press too much from the outside, your walls are going to start caving in. So the equal amount of pressure is really important at this stage. All right, so let me show you how it's done. Now notice I'm working in the 5 o'clock position or so. So I'm working kind of in the bottom right-hand corner. That's always where you want to do work whenever you're right-handed when you're throwing. So I'm going to keep making sure my fingers are nice and wet. I'm going to start putting some pressure from the very bottom. I'm going to start working my way up. So notice my pot is getting taller. And so right now my rim is a little uneven. So every time after you pull, so it's called pulling, so every time after you pull up, you're going to take your right hand finger and you're going to press down on the top. And this is called compressing the rim. And we're going to clean it up later, but you want to compress the rim after every time you pull up because it helps prevent cracking and tearing of your pot, and it will make it a stronger walls. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do another pull or two. So it depends on how much pressure you're putting that it's going to require how many pulls that you need to take. So notice my speed is pretty slow here. I'm not going really fast like that. That's only the speed for centering. But notice I'm going a nice slow pace, having control of the wheel. So I'm going to do another pull. So I'm paying really close attention to the walls of my pot. If it gets really thin and I start putting a lot of pressure, my pot's going to tear. So it's really on me as the potter to really pay attention. I'm going to go back and compress my rim again. And I'm going to do it just one more time. So there's my cylinder. Next thing I'm going to do, if I want to turn the cylinder into a cup, here's how I would do it. I would make sure, of course, that it's still slick, but now I'm not pulling up anymore. I just want a little bit of curve to my cup. So anytime I do anything to the outside, I always need to have reinforcement on the inside with my hands, whatever that may be. So I'm going to keep my left hand on the inside, and I'm going to use my metal rib. I like to curve my rib like this, and I'm going to get rid of these marks on the outside here. So I'm going to start pressing from the inside, pressing the cup into the metal rib on the outside. I'm just kind of gently shaping right now. And I'm being really careful because I don't want to hurt my cup or throw it off balance. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a chamois cloth and I'm going to clean up the edge, because when you drink out of a cup, you don't want a really rough edge. You want a nice smooth edge. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my chamois cloth like this, and I'm going to, it's nice and wet and slick, I'm just going to take my chamois cloth and I'm going to wrap it around the edge. So notice I'm holding it at the very top edge. I'm not just kind of limply holding it. I have to kind of press it like this or pull it apart. And I'm just going to kind of wrap it over the top edge just for a minute. Just like that. So now my cup has a nice rounded edge rather than a rough edge. And so I can just kind of go through and clean up anything I want to be cleaned up. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wooden point tool right here. Now we want to get rid of this extra clay at the bottom. Now we're going to go back and trim that later, but I want to get rid of as much as possible now so it saves me some work. I'm using the sponge to get some extra water out of the bottom of my pot, just so it helps it dry more evenly. All right, so I'm going to take my wooden tool, and so in the same spot, in that 5 o'clock spot, holding it with both hands, I'm going to very slowly, so I'm putting it in at an angle, just to get rid of some of the extra clay around the base. Okay, and then I'm going to go until I hit the bottom, and then I'm just going to cut it. Move it away like that. All right, so now all I'm going to do is I need this to set up because it's so soft we can't do any trimming yet or add a handle. So I'm going to take my bat like this and I'm going to put it to the side. I'm going to loosely cover it with plastic, leave it on your shelf for a day or two, and then hopefully by the next class it should be ready to go.